Okay. Well, today I want to review the next assignment for our poetic analysis, which is parallelism. We spent a little bit of time on that really right at the beginning of our in-person class together when we were meeting. But I know for many of us that was kind of a new concept. This idea of parallelism, Hebrew poetry, and so wanted to take the opportunity and review it because it's going to be your second exegetical assignment. I know some guys have already done it. I think Yancey, you've already done it, but if I remember right. But it's still helpful because it's an important element of Hebrew poetry. It really helps us to see not only just the aesthetic quality of how the writer uses it, but also parallelism is important because it helps in interpreting. Because if you see two lines, if you can understand the relationship between those two lines within a verse, that helps give insight into what the meaning of that particular verse. And then when we get to the diagramming, the block diagram, we can then see how all the verses, all the phrases connect together within the text to give us overall understanding of the flow of thought in the poem. So far in the first session, the first assignment, written assignment that you had, we covered last week was the setting and structure of the poem. So that's the first thing we do is we dig into just the overall, get familiar with the poem by reading it several times, making observations, and then looking at the structure of the poem, um, or the setting, excuse me, of the poem, which is the background, and then the structure. And so that's just getting us familiar with the poem, sort of uh, getting an idea of the overall theme and how it's laid out. Now we're going to start focusing on the smaller details, and that begins with parallelism. And let me just remind us parallelism. Uh, Again, we're in the poetic analysis steps. Let's recall the types of parallelism. So I'll go through a few examples just to remind us, and then we'll all look at Psalm 99, which is the psalm we're going through as the example in these sessions, just to review the various steps, particularly for poetic analysis. So remember, there were basically three general types of parallelism that we see in Hebrew poetry. And again, remember, parallelism is simply that there's an intended relationship, particular relationship between lines within a verse. All right. And so there were three general types of uh, parallelism that we discussed in class. The first is synonymous, and that's just as it sounds, synonym. The second line is essentially saying the same thing or something very similar to the first line. So here's an example. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before stumbling. So we have pride in the first line, a haughty spirit in the second line. Goes before in the first line. And notice here that goes is not written in the verse, but actually, um, if you notice as well, you guys see here in the first line, that word goes is in italics. And if you remember, in some translations, this is the New American Standard. In some translations, like the New American Standard, the translation will italicize words that aren't in the original. Sometimes translations will, they'll add words into the text that will help smooth out or help make the translation more readable. And so in this case, the translators have pride goes before destruction. So actually, that word goes isn't in the Hebrew text literally. So it's literally pride before destruction, a haughty spirit before stumbling. Okay, and so they added the English word goes in order to, oops, to kind of make it more, a little bit more understandable in English. But literally, we could say this, and sometimes this is what I'll do when I encounter a oops, when I encounter italicized word, sometimes I'll leave it there, but I'll cross it out, um, and just go with the more literal translation. So here, literally, it's pride before, and here's the word destruction. The second line, haughty spirit before stumbling. All right, and notice the parallelism here. Pride, haughty spirit, those are synonyms. Before is the same word used in both lines. Then destruction and stumbling, those are synonyms as well. That's why this is called synonymous parallelism. The second line is essentially saying the same thing as the first, with just using synonyms, but the grammar will be the same, and the words used will be synonymous. All right, so this is probably the easiest one of the easier ones to spot, and I think I would say probably the most common, very close to it. All right, synonymous parallelism. Now there's another form that we covered in class, and that was contrastive. In synonymous, the second line repeats the first. It's synonymous with the first. Whereas in contrastive, the second line contrasts the first. So here we have, the house of the wicked will be destroyed, but the tent of the upright will flourish. Notice again the use of synonyms in this case. The house of the wicked. And then here, the tent of the upright. Notice the antonym here, the opposite, wicked versus upright. But house, tent, those are the same idea. The house of the wicked, the tent of the upright. So those parallel each other. Will be destroyed. All right, so will be destroyed, or actually I could put it all together, and will flourish. Okay, again, opposites here. The house of the wicked versus the tent of the upright will be destroyed versus will flourish. Okay, so this is the contrast. Now, if it had said, but the tent of the it would have if it had said the tent of the evil will be no more. Okay, here we would have that would be synonymous. Okay, saying the same thing, but in this case it's contrastive because it's talking about the opposite, and we see this a lot, especially in the Proverbs. Proverbs often employs this contrastive parallelism, where it's using opposites in order to teach a particular lesson. Now, for example, if I go to, let me pull up Proverbs 10, for example. Blessings are on the head of the righteous, but mouth of the wicked conceals violence. The memory of the righteous is blessed. The name of the wicked will rot. Notice the opposite. Memory, name, righteous, wicked, blessed, rot. Okay? The mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence. Notice opposites. Hatred stirs up strife. Love covers transgression. So hatred is the opposite, right, of love. And then we have stirs up is the opposite of covers. And then strife is the opposite of transgressions. Okay, so it's a contrast. So this is, like I said, pretty common in Proverbs, contrastive parallelism. And then the third category, and this is the most broad one, is what we call developmental. That is this idea, one line develops the other. They're strongly connected to each other, but they're not giving a synonymous or contrastive connection. Rather, the connection is this idea of development, developmental. One line develops the other. And we learned there were three ways that this is shown or seen in Hebrew poetry. The first is the development can be an addition or expansion. That is, it adds information. The heart knows its own bitterness, and a stranger does not share its joy. Now, here, this is not synonymous or contrastive. Notice it's the heart is the subject, but here, the second line, the stranger is the subject. Now, those really aren't synonyms. Knows is the verb here, all right? And then we have does not share. So those are, again, not really synonymous. Knows its own bitterness. Shares its joy. Now, in this case, bitterness and joy do have a contrastive link, but I don't think, because of the rest of the line, I don't think these are synonymous or contrastive. What he's doing is he's adding a second piece of information in the second line. So that's why we call it developmental addition or expansion. He's expanding on the idea presented in the first line. All right. Now, the challenge sometimes, and I noticed this in your assignment, some of the guys that turn their assignments in, is at times it's difficult to know, is this synonymous or is it expansion? Is the second line adding more information or is it synonymous? And the way to check that is to, again, look at each part of the sentence, the subject, the verb, and the object. Do the subjects, are they synonymous? Are the verbs synonymous? Are the objects synonymous? And is it presented in a synonymous structure grammatically? And so usually if it's developmental, it's not, like we saw here in this example in Proverbs 14, where the subjects aren't synonymous. The heart and the stranger, and knows and does not share is not really synonymous either. Okay. Now, if it had said something like the heart knows its own bitterness and the soul understands sorrow. Okay, now that would be synonymous, because heart and soul would have a synonymous idea, understands and knows, and then bitterness and sorrow. Okay, so there we would see it more clearly. But or if the second line had been, but the mind understands, or let's say knows joy. This is not a true statement. I'm just making something up for the sake of an example. Here we have heart and mind would be kind of similar, but notice joy and bitterness would be opposite. And then knows and knows would be the same. So it's, again, this line is structured the same as the first, but it's giving an opposite or contrasting statement. So that would be contrast, right? But what we have is this: the heart and stranger, which aren't synonymous, knows and does not share. And then those are not synonymous either. So that's why I would say it's addition or expansion. Any questions on that? We'll get some more examples when we get to Psalm 99. A second form of developmental, second type, is explanation or illustration, where one line explains or illustrates the other. So in this case, we have, as the deer pants for the water brooks, so my soul pants for you, O God. All right. Now, notice that word so here gives us a little bit of a clue, but here, let's look at it. So, as the deer pants, my soul pants, and then is for, in this case, the water brooks versus God. Now, at first you might say, well, that looks like synonymous. But again, think about what's the link, what's the connection between these two lines. He's making a comparison, isn't he? He's not saying the same thing twice, right? Because notice the word as and so. Maybe I should highlight those in another color here. He's making a comparison here, or an illustration. All right, these are not synonymous, definitely not contrastive, right? he's not comparing what the water brooks to God in a sense directly. Those aren't synonyms. But what he's saying is, in the way that a deer pants for water, so in that way my soul pants for you. So notice the first line is an illustration of the second line. Right? His statement is, my soul pants for you, O God. And then he gives an illustration of that by saying, just like the deer pants for water. Okay? You guys see that? So we would call this, I would call it an illustration or explanation. The second line, sorry, the first line is an illustration of the second line. Okay? And then the last example here, the last type of developmental is purpose or result, where one line is the purpose or result of the other. Leave the presence of a fool, or you will not discern the words of knowledge. So notice he's making a statement here. First, the command, leave the presence of a fool. And then notice the second line is the reason. Right? The idea is, if you don't leave the presence of the fool, right? You will not discern knowledge, right? So leave him, because if you don't leave him, this is going to be this is the reason. All right. So here I would say the second line is the purpose of the first. You will not discern. If you don't leave the presence of a fool, you will not discern words of knowledge, meaning you will not know wisdom if you're in the presence of a fool. Okay, this isn't synonymous. It's not contrastive. It's developmental. And the way that it's developmental is the second line develops the first line by giving the reason for it. Okay? So those are examples again, the three significant categories or types of parallelism are synonymous, contrastive, and developmental. And developmental, we have, right, three kinds: expands, illustrates, or purpose, result. All right, those are the three ways. So when you do the assignment and you identify the parallelism, don't just put developmental, put what kind. How is it developing? All right, and it's one of those three ways: add, expand, or explain, illustrate, or purpose, result. Okay. All right, questions? That was intended just to review what we covered before. But like I said, because it's maybe a new way of understanding something, maybe a new topic introduced to some of you. I wanted to just cover it again. But you can go back to your notes in the syllabus, pages 3 to 10. So really right at the beginning is when we talked about it. If you go to pages 3 to 10, and I posted the teacher syllabus notes on the Canvas, which, by the way, maybe let me show you that. I think everyone should be familiar with this by now, but sometimes it's helpful to remind ourselves. Let me just show you this real quick. Let's go to Canvas. Oh, it's going to ask me for. Sorry, guys. Give me a minute. All right. I just wanted to go to module 3 here. All right, the home page, and then this is the key link here. You can get the syllabus here, teacher's version, Okay. Here, the student version, that's the one you guys had in class. The teacher version, that one I put in all the answers to the examples. Okay, so that's the only difference between the student and teacher. The student version, the one you had, when we did the exercises in class, we just had blanks because we were doing the exercise. But I put the answers to those exercises in the teacher's version. All right, so that's the one you want to download or access. All right, and in that version, we have the um, pages 3 to 10 will cover the parallelism. Now, notice too, by the way, this is the key link, as you guys should know by now, where I put everything. So I put all of the files, all the important files here as well. All right. So, for example, I have put in here, if you can see this, um, we put the in-class lectures that we covered when we were together. So we videoed all the lectures, so you can come in and catch those. And then last week's session, I put in the handout and the assignment. You can get the assignment. You can download it from here as well, and then the video for that. Um, and then I also put the page numbers to review for that particular topic. All right, so everything's here that you would need. So here, assignment 3.9 for today. And then notice for the parallelism, I put the page numbers 3 to 10 on the teacher's syllabus. Okay? So you can get all that information there. Now, let's go ahead and, oh, I'm sorry. There's a couple other things I forgot to mention. There's a special class of synonymous or contrastive parallelism, and those are called chiasms. These aren't a different, they're still synonymous or contrastive, but there is one added twist, literally a twist, a flip, one added feature in chiasms that are different, and that is the second line is reversed grammatically. So, for example, Psalm 51:5, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me. Now, notice this is synonymous parallelism. I was brought forth, my mother conceived me, right? That's the same idea. It's a synonymous idea described in two different ways. In iniquity, in sin. Those are synonymous, right? Iniquity, sin. Those are synonyms. But notice the sentence is flipped. In sin, or excuse me, in iniquity is at the end of the first line. In sin, which is the parallel statement in the second line, is at the beginning of the second line. So the author intentionally reversed the word order for emphasis. So really, and sometimes this is what I'll do when you see this, is I was brought forth in iniquity and in sin my mother conceived me. Some people will do this just because of that and. They'll do it this way. All right, so this is following the word order. I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me. And what this does is a chiasm. It kind of has this chi is a Greek letter. It kind of looks like X in English, and this has that kind of structure because a chiasm is meant to focus attention on the part in the center, on the part that was flipped. Okay, so here, what's being emphasized in this, and this is why the author does it, it's not just to be, different or unique or have some artistic quality, though it does. It's mainly to draw attention to the part that got reversed. And in this case, he's focusing attention on iniquity and sin because he wants to emphasize that in this particular statement. Okay, and we actually went through Psalm 51 in class. I think Brothers Rodell, Brother Stanley did that in class. Maybe it was Rodell, I think. But we looked at this psalm, Psalm 51, and we found that there were a number of chiasms in that psalm, more than I think I've seen in any other. I think half the verses were chiasms, close to it. And it makes sense. That was a very emotional psalm, a lot of emphasis. David was in great anguish, and that psalm reflects the emotion of that. The chiasms show that, because chiasms are points of emphasis, bring emphasis. And the reason it's important to know this is not just some, academic knowledge, like, oh, hey, I know what a chiasm is. And we're not, that's not the point of this at all. It's if you can recognize a chiasm, that's the author signaling you, cluing you in to, like, hey, I'm making an emphatic point here. I'm emphasizing something. And so when you preach the passage, you want to follow the lead of the author. And if he's emphasizing something in some way, then you want to note that and follow that as you teach through the psalm. It's like, okay, there's emphasis here. So when I read it, when I talk about it, I want to convey that emphasis. All right. So that's why it's important when we're looking at poetry, because again, remember, one of the elements is it presents imagery and figure of language in order to stir the emotions, to draw in the emotions from the truths being presented in the text. And so it's our job to see. We don't just make up emotions or see something that's not there. We just want to follow the direction the author gives. And so chiasms are one of the ways that he does that. Okay, it's an intentional tool, an intentional thing that the author does in order to show that emphasis. Okay. And so in this example, the emphasis is on, we can see David is expressing, he's focusing on sin and iniquity, his sin, his iniquity, as a point of emphasis, like I'm a sinner. And so he said, I was born, brought forth in sin my mother conceived me, but the focus here is the sin, the iniquity. And he also emphasizes iniquity and sin in this psalm by repeating it all through the psalm. Iniquity, sin, wickedness, transgression, evil. He uses all those synonyms all through the psalm. So we really get this sense from David that he sees his sin and he is accepting responsibility for his sin. So we see it in the repetition, and we see the emphasis and emotion in chiasms. Okay? So keep an eye out for that. If you're looking at it, because when you look at this particular verse, at first it may not even seem like a synonymous parallelism because of the order of the words. But pay attention to that. The words aren't, even in synonymous parallelism, the words aren't always going to be in the same order. Like I said, so here, I was brought forth, my mother conceived me, and in iniquity and in sin. Notice in iniquity and in sin, there are different places in the sentence, but it's still synonymous. It's still saying the same thing. It's just the word order has been changed. So we'll see chiasms in synonymous or contrastive parallelism. So for this, I would say this is synonymous parallelism with a chiasm, or in a chiastic. If you want to be more fancy and sound smart, you could say in a chiastic structure. But it's synonymous parallelism, and then it's utilizing or using a chiasm. Okay? Everyone follow me? Any questions on that or comments? All right. Well, finally, this is everybody's favorite, is sometimes we just don't know what the parallelism is, so we just say, but, no idea. Um, so we will have that. Normally in the Psalms, you won't have too many like that. Normally in the Psalms, every verse is parallelism. Once in a while, we'll come across one, which is, I'm not sure. Um, but when you get to like prophetic books or books outside of the Psalms that have poetry, you will see less parallelism being used. So parallelism is more a feature of like Proverbs and Psalms, the book of Proverbs and book of Psalms. There's parallelism used outside of that in other poetic texts, but not always. So just keep that in mind. When we get to prophecy, you're going to see that. As we go through some of the prophetic texts, we'll see the poetry being used because of imagery, figures of speech, emotional expressions, but we may not always see parallelism being used there. All right, but you will see it in your psalm, your assigned psalms and proverbs passages. Okay, but there may be a verse here and there at times that parallelism is not obvious, so you can just say umbut if you want. You know, but it should be pretty rare. I can only think of a few verses maybe in all the assigned psalms that you guys have that could be that. Okay. All right. So those are so we really have um, the three types, the three categories of parallel: synonymous, contrastive, developmental. Okay, and then we talked about like a special case of synonymous and contrastive would be chiasm. Um, and then developmental, we discussed there are the three: the expansion, addition, or explanation, illustration, or purpose, result. Okay? And then we have the unknowns. If we can't identify whether it's synonymous, contrastive, or developmental, then you can just say unknown. Okay? All right. So, with that reviewed, let's dive into our example from Psalm 99. And we're going to remember, do this, and I'll have you combine these steps. When you do the assignment, you're going to have it do it in two steps. You're going to identify how many lines are in the verse, and then the type of parallelism used between each line. For our example, here, I'll just have you do them both at the same time. So we'll identify, I'll have each of you read the verse, and then go ahead and read it. Tell me how many lines are there, and that'll usually be the easy part. And then identify the kind of parallelism. So maybe I should put the type of parallelism on one side here. All right, give me a moment to do that. Oh, okay, there. That over here. Okay. Thank you for your patience. Let's jump into the psalm here. Psalm 99. So I'm going to ask Stephen, good morning. Could you read verses 1 to 3, and then Jerome 4 and 5, and then Nigel, I want to ask you to read 6 through 9. Let's just remind ourselves of this psalm.
All right. The Lord reigns. Let the peoples tremble. Oh, I'm reading my. Should I read what's on the screen, Dr. Tim? I'm reading my
Sure.
hard copy.
New American Standard. So, yeah, go ahead and
Okay.
read.
The Lord reigns. Let the peoples tremble. He is enthroned above the cherubim. Let the earth shake. The Lord is great in Zion, and he is exalted above all the peoples. Let them praise your great and awesome name. Holy is he.
Verse 4 and 5. The strength of the king loves justice. You have established equity. You have executed justice and righteousness in Jacob. Exalt the Lord our God and worship at his footstool. Holy is he.
Verses 6 to 9. Moses and Aaron were among his priests, and Samuel was among those who called on his name. They called upon the Lord, and he answered them. He spoke to them in the pillar of cloud. They kept his testimonies and the statute that he gave them. O Lord, our God, you answered them. You were a forgiving God to them, and yet an avenger of their evil deeds. Exalt the Lord our God and worship at his holy hill, for holy is the Lord our God.
All right. And now we did review this psalm last session together, and went through background of the psalm. If you'll remember the setting of this particular psalm, um, we looked at made some observations. But the psalm, if you remember, we identified it as likely. Background of it is likely the time when David brought the ark back to the tabernacle in Jerusalem. And First Chronicles 15, 16, and they had a big celebration. And then if you looked at First Chronicles 16, David had Asaph lead the people in a song, and the song contains many statements that we find in Psalms 96 through 99. And so I believe those particular psalms came out of that celebration when the ark was being brought into the temple. And we see references to the ark here in this psalm, as we discussed last week. He's enthroned above the cherubim. Okay, that's a picture of the mercy seat. When God would, in the wilderness with Moses, he would hover over the mercy seat, and the mercy seat has a cherubim on it. And then notice worship at his footstool. Footstool at times can refer to the ark, can also refer to the temple or even the earth at times. But so we have those couple references, and then notice we have Zion mentioned. We have Holy Hill mentioned. We have where's the temple? I thought the temple was in here somewhere. Did I miss it? At least those two references. And then even just the Lord reigns, right? That's another statement we see in First Chronicles 16. And so exalt and worship, those elements are also. So I think the background of the psalm is likely set in that the setting is actually that particular event. Okay, we don't know for certain because we don't have like a superscription that gives us the specifics. But I think, again, a careful comparison of the song that was sung at that time with these particular psalms, which are listed as enthronement psalms because they emphasize the reign of Yahweh and his greatness. I think a good case could be made for that. And then we talked about the emphasis on the holiness of God. The repetition there, we had the stanzas, which all make the statement, holy is Lord our God. And then each of them also focus on the idea of him being exalted. All right, so we see a clear theme throughout the psalm, and we also identified the structure, 3 stanzas, verses 1 to 3, 4 to 6, and 6 to 9. That each stanza ends with the declaration, a call to praise and worship, and the statement of his holiness. And each stanza, verses 1 to 3, focuses on the greatness of God. The second stanza focuses on the justice of God. And the third one focused on the fact that he answered, he forgave, he was near them. And so we see a particular thematic focus in each of these as well. So we identified those three stanzas. Okay, so now what I'd like to do is have us take a look at, we'll go verse by verse and just identify the parallelism. And here again, I'm going to have give you guys to read the verse and then state the number of lines. And there will be a couple times where we'll have, there may be an issue with the number of lines, and we'll talk about that when we get there. And then I'd like you to state what parallelism, what you think the type of parallelism is. And we've got that on the right here, those three different kinds to remind you of it. Okay. So who is the, yeah.
Where does reason belong? So it's categorized with purpose and result.
Yeah, you could say reason.
Oh, okay. So if reason or purpose both are somehow synonymous, is it?
Yeah, they're the same thing. We could put reason result if that's easier to remember. Both of them,
Okay.
reason purpose answers the question why.
Oh, okay. So from the assignment, then, if I answer reason, it's similar to purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Okay.
think in the assignment I did have reason instead of purpose, but they're interchangeable.
Okay, okay. Thank you, Dr. Tim, for clarifying.
Thanks. Sorry for the confusion on that. Okay. Well, how about Nell, if you're there, why don't you take a attempt here at the first verse? Go ahead and read it and let us know what parallelism you think it is. Okay. And how many lines in the parallelism?
The Lord reigns and he's enthroned, synonymous.
Okay, well, first, how many lines do we see here in the verse? There's two lines, but one thing I've told you guys that you need to do, because remember that the line separation is actually something in the Hebrew text. Let me look at so many. So what I told you guys to do is for the lines, you're going to need to look at two other translations. So the NAS has two lines. The ESV has two lines. And then I want you also to look at the New King James. Now, the New King James has four. Well, wait a minute. So if you use the New King James, you would say, oh, there are four lines here. But what I want you to do is compare the New American Standard, ESV, and New King James, and then pick what the majority is. So in this case, ESV and New American Standard are both two lines. New King James is four, but we'll go with the two lines. So it'll match the New American Standard approach. Now, sometimes it will be a little different, and I'll point that out as we go through. All right. Unless you guys, can pick up, learn Hebrew and learn Hebrew accents. All right. If you can do that in the next week or two, then you can go right to the Hebrew text if you want. And as I mentioned in class, it's these accents here. You can see this one here. That's called an athnak. And that tells us, those accents tell us where the line division occurs. All right. And in the case of verse 1, all right, Yahweh, here's Yahweh is great. Let tremble the peoples. Okay. Now, the New King James put a split here, but there's no accent. in the Hebrew text. Okay? The only accent mark is here. And the same in the second line. Here's an accent mark, and that's the only one. So that'll tell us. But again, unless you read Hebrew and know that there's different kinds of accent marks, by the way. Really just need to rely on, in this case, the English translations. And I have found, normally English translations are pretty good. And when there's a difference, sometimes I have found just comparing the New American Standard, the ESV, and the New King James, that usually, if they don't all agree, just pick the two that agree. Okay? Any questions on that? So
How
start
do
with
you
your
spell Aftinek,
Athnac.
Dr. Tim?
It's
Afnek?
Athnac is Athnac. So that's how
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Yeah, if you want to look it up online, I haven't done this. See what happens. If I look up online, Hebrew accent marks, see what happens. Well, I showed you guys Dr. Barrick's website. This is drbarrick.org. He's got a whole paper on this. So you can go through. If you're really, those of you that are really, language geeks and are really into this, here's the best resource I could recommend. It's from Dr. Barrick, and he goes through and discusses accent marks. And here are the most common accents. When he says disjunctive, that means separator, like a comma or semicolon. All right. And here's Athnac. Okay. So he goes through, these are the 6 most common. Division, or disjunctive means division. Conjunctive means connecting. You don't have to worry about that for Hebrew poetry. All right, so then he goes through some examples. And I think he does it for poetry. You can skip all this. Yeah, accents in the poetic books. Okay, so here's the 5 most common separating accents, and then he gives a couple examples. So if you really are interested, if you know a little bit of Hebrew, this is like the definitive work. He's the one who taught me about this. So you can get that on drbarrick.org. Okay. But like I said, if it can get a little complicated, it'll take a while to figure all that out. If you're not familiar with Hebrew and accents and things like that, then just go to the 3 translations, New American Standard, ESV, New King James, and then go with the majority, the 2 that agree. And sometimes all 3 will agree. In this case, they don't. But the ESV and New American Standard has 2 lines. So that's what we're going with. All right. Sorry about that, Nell. But I wanted to bring that up early on. Okay. So what do you think as far as the type of parallelism here?
Oh, yeah, the synonymous, the Lord reigns and is himself.
Yeah. The Lord reigns. He is enthroned. That's the same idea, right? And then let the peoples tremble.
And
Let the earth shake. All right. So there's a little bit more in the second line. He's adding, he enthroned above the cherubim, but it's the synonymous idea. Okay. And then really with the statement, let the peoples tremble, let the earth shake, tremble, shake. I think we can see the synonymous connection there. So I would agree with that. All right. Any questions on that? Some might say, well, it looks like, developmental expansion because it just looks a little different in the second line. But I think it's still against the same idea. The Lord reigns, he is enthroned. I think that's the same point being made. And then the second line really shows it more of the synonymous idea is being presented here. All right. Okay. Godwin, good morning to you. And I'm going to give you the second verse here.
The Lord is great in Zion and is exalted above all the peoples. Two lines.
Okay, so now let's check that because that's what the New American Standard has.
Yeah.
So I'll pull up. Let's look at the ESV. How many lines in the ESV?
Two.
Two. All right. And then New King James, also two. So they all three agree this time. And as I showed you in the Hebrew text, they're correct in that regard. So okay, two lines, that's confirmed. Now, what kind of parallelism do you see here?
Oh, like no, just synonyms. No, synonyms. The Lord is great in Zion.
Yeah, and usually I'll just I'll separate the subject, verb, and object. So the subject in the first one is the Lord, right? Second is he. Uh, is great, is exalted.
Yes.
All right, then in Zion, above all the peoples. So what is that kind of, does that help a little bit or?
Synonyms.
Yeah, I think so.
Synonymous. I think it's synonymous because the Lord and He. Yeah, that's what you highlighted.
Yeah, great, exalted. Now Zion's different than the people, so that, someone could say, well, that's expansion. Well, but I think the idea is still he's great in Jerusalem, he's above all the people. So I would still go with synonymous in this case. Now, there's something interesting. We don't see it in the English, unfortunately. So this is one other thing you need to consider when you do the parallelism is you'll need to look at the interlinear. Why do I say that? Because again, word order. And if we go to the interlinear, which is at BibleHub.com, all right, and we go to Psalm 99, so just put Psalm 99 in up here. And interlinear is the interlin here, right? Similar, you also would have this on the Discovery Bible app if that's what you're using. And go to interlinear. And then let's take a look at verse 2 here. The interlinear just shows and remember, Hebrew is read from the right to the left. So we start over here. Okay. And then notice we have the mid. So the middle again is this middle section is the Hebrew text. And then the most literal definition of each word is put below. And notice it says Yahweh in Zion is great. And then high he is above all the peoples. So actually, the word order is reversed. The second line starts with high. You guys see that? Just following again, we're reading from right to left. Okay. Following the word order, Yahweh in Zion is great. High he is above all the peoples. So this is what it would look like. And if it was translated more literally, like follow the word order, and great he is, or is great. Sorry, not great, is exalted. And exalted he is above peoples. And two, the in Zion, if you look again at the interlinear, Yahweh in Zion is great. See that? So in Zion is switched around. So it's literally the Lord in Zion is great and exalted above the peoples. So you see,
Yes.
the emphasis is here, great and exalted. It's a chiasm. You're right,
Yeah.
Godwin. Okay. So it's synonymous and it's also chiasm. Now, we don't see that in English. It's the same, the word order, it's in the same order. But the literal word order is actually as I expressed down here. So you can find the literal word order by going to the Bible Hub, to the interlinear, and just follow from right to left, and you'll see it. All right. So that's one thing that sometimes I'm disappointed with the translations is they don't always do a great job translating the Psalms. They'll match the word meaning okay, but the other poetic elements they don't always do a good job of bringing over. And word order is one of them. They just prioritize clarity and so readability. And so they will put it in like a normal word order for English. Normally in English, you have subject, verb, object. But not always. There's many examples in English poetry where word order is reversed, and we see it in hymns and things, where word order is reversed to draw attention to something. So I don't know why they aren't consistent in that way in the Psalms. Unfortunately, they do a good job translating the ideas, but not the poetic elements. So we have to do a little bit of extra work because, like I said, you want to know if a chiasm is being used. You want to know if the word order is being followed because that can convey the poet, the original author, can be giving us some important details and information by the order of the wording, the word order. And so here, if you didn't know, if you just follow the English translation, and I'm willing to bet the Mayang Balita is probably the same. It probably just because it's translated from today's English version, which I think follows just gives a word order in English. It doesn't give the chiastic order. So I'm willing to bet that you won't see it in the Cebuano translation either. Maybe you do. I don't know if one of you guys has it open, you can check it and see. But unfortunately, it's often not followed. And in fact, it's interesting in Psalm 51 when we went through that example. Some of the verses didn't follow the exact word order, so you didn't see the chiasm. There were a couple verses where it actually the English they did flip the words, but they weren't flipped in the original Hebrew. So in the English, it made a chiasm that wasn't in the original Hebrew. So I don't know why. It's like come on, because again, even the structure, the chiastic structure, is part of the inspired text. And so this isn't just some little detail that a point of irritation, or it's actually matters. It's part of identifying the original author's intent. And by not showing that change in word order, I don't think the translation is being as faithful or consistent to the original author's intent. Okay, that's just my opinion. I'm not trying to be critical. I love the American Standard Translation. God save me with that translation. And the English translations are very good, but I would say Psalms are probably one of the weakest areas, generally speaking, of translations because of this. So, all right,
Dr. Tim,
that's free stuff. Yeah.
What do you think about the 2020 version of NASB? Are we supposed to use it or?
Well, actually, honestly, I think they took a step back a little bit on that translation. Um, I think the best LSB is very good. I think the New American Standard translation from 1977 is the best. 95 is good, but the 2020 version, they started incorporating a little bit of the general neutral stuff, and I think, and they changed some of the passages, made it a little bit less clear. So I'm not a big fan of the 2020. It's not a bad one. I'm not saying that at all. I think the 95 is better, and to me the 77 is the best New American Standard one. But I like the LSB because it took the 1995 NAS and then put Yahweh in and did some modifications that I thought made it stronger. But as you can see, let's take a look at the Psalms. I think they didn't. So the Psalm here, Psalm 2, let's see what they did with verse 2. Yeah, see, they didn't follow, they didn't follow the word order of the Hebrew either. So that's just my opinion. I prefer the 95 version. Okay. So here we have a couple things now we need to look for. We're doing parallelism. One, we need to pay attention and look at the different English translations or go direct to the interlinear to see the line. Compare the English translations to see the number of lines. And then you'll need to do a check on the interlinear to look at word order and just make sure that we didn't miss a chiasm here. Now, if you are looking at developmental parallelism, then the word order isn't going to be as significant because there aren't usually a chiasm with developmental. I think I've only seen that a couple of times, if I remember. But still, it's always helpful to check the interlinear anyway, just to see. I think it's a good exercise. If you know the Hebrew, language, then you can just go right to the Hebrew text. But most of us don't have that capability at this point. Okay. Well, I promise we won't take as long on the next, rest of the verses, but just trying to cover these key points here. Again, our goal is trying to figure out what the author is saying. What did the author intend? And so the word order is part of that. That helps give us insight into what he is trying to communicate and the way in which he expresses that. Okay. All right. Let's get back to and I'm going to ask, let's see. So I think Nell and Godwin. So Nigel, you want to take the next verse? Oops.
All right, verse 3. Let them sing, let them praise your great and awesome name. Holy is he. Let me check the other translations, but the NASB has 2 lines.
ESV.
ESV also has 2. Yes.
And
yes.
the New King James. Okay, so we're good there. 2
All
lines.
Right, so 2 lines. And then developmental expansion.
Okay, developmental expansion. Okay, so why would you go with that?
I mean, the structure is different comparing the first and second lines.
Yes.
And
yeah, so if we look at the subject, them in the first line, he in the second, the verb is praise, is, and then your great, awesome name is the object in the first line. Let me get the right color here. And then holy is the subject complement. So yeah, the structure's different. They're not really synonymous statements, right? So we know it's not synonymous or contrastive. So developmental is the next idea. Now you said expansion. What?
Yeah, as we're looking at it more, I'm thinking it can also be result, or I mean reason.
Yeah. So what do you see here? What?
Let them praise your great and awesome name because Yahweh is holy.
Yeah, I think that's right. So there's an implied conjunction here. Remember, as I said in class, conjunctions, and this will be when we get to diagramming, what makes it a little harder to do with poetry is the conjunctions are often left out for the sake of brevity, shortness. And so you have to do some thinking as to, okay, what seems to be the connection here. And I agree with you, Nigel. I think he's making this declaration that he's holy right after he gives them a command to praise God. So I don't think he's adding because he's not giving a second command. I think he's saying why, the reason, or you could say purpose, the reason for the command, because he is holy. So I would say the second line gives the reason for the first. In other words, why praise Yahweh? Because he is holy. All right. And by the way, we get a little hint if we go down to verse 9. Exalt the Lord our God, worship at his holy hill, for, and this time the psalmist put the conjunction in, the Lord our God is holy. So we do see, he explicitly tells us in the last verse, he does make that connection explicitly for us with the conjunction. So I think, given that verse 9 is the same as verse 5, is similar to verse 3, they're all functioning as a refrain. I think it is not, I think it is very reasonable to assume that holy as he is the reason. All right. Very good. Questions on that? Comments? Okay. Let's keep going. Jerome?
Sorry. Also, Tim,
Oh, yeah.
can I ask a
Godwin.
question?
Yes, sir.
With regards in identifying with this structure, is it what do you think about in the logos? Sorry, with the logos software pastor team and this Psalms Explorer, is it okay to use this?
Psalms
There's a
Explorer.
yeah,
I'm not
it's
familiar with it.
because there's a Hebrew parallelism structure
It's called
and also
Psalms
the
Explorer
Explorer. Yeah, and I think in the layouts, I'm not sure if it's okay to
layouts.
study this quick
Yeah,
start layouts.
where's layouts? Tools. Oops, it's not what I
I think it's
wanted.
it, no in the lower side, left
Down
side
here?
lower. Yeah, yeah. No, up the that one.
This
No,
one. Oh, this
no,
one.
the other one. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, oh, oh. There's a Psalms.
There's no Psalms here.
Maybe I don't
Huh?
have it, my version.
Maybe in
Okay.
the tools, Dr. Tim.
You can use yeah. You check the other tools. Because here in the quick start, I have Psalms Explorer.
I tried to search from that module and some Explorer came out.
Okay, so just try it here then. Psalm.
Yeah. Oh, there's
Okay.
Okay, here's just Explorer.
But I think there's also some resources for this so that we can understand. I think the way you teach us today, I think somehow I got essence right now. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say just in general, because that's another resource, don't do it. Don't use it yet. I'm not familiar with it, but basically, I want you to do this on your own first. Um,
Yeah. Okay.
but I'll have to look. Didn't know about that. I'll have to. I'm not a very good Logos guy because I don't use all the features. Um, Not because I think they're bad or anything. I just never. I can barely. To me, I have time to barely do like word studies and the grammar and all that stuff. So, and then look at a few commentaries. But yeah, do it. Try to do it. Just do it on your own. Um, as best
Okay,
you
Pastor.
can.
Okay, Pastor. Thank you.
All right. Okay, Jerome, we're giving you a fun one here. Verse 4.
In verse 4, in AV version, there are 4 lines.
Okay, let's
In
go ahead and read it. Read the verse first, and then we'll take a look at the other translations.
in AV version, the king is mighty, he loves justice. First line. The second line is, you have established equity. Third line, in Jacob we have done. Thus in line 4, what is just and right.
Yeah, what translation was that?
NIV.
Okay. Yeah,
In ESV version, there's also 4 lines.
yeah, there's 4 in ESV, there's 3 in New American Standard, and then there's
And then
New
2
King
in King
James
James.
is
2.
3.
Hmm?
3.
King James?
New King James.
No, King James. King James
Yeah.
na lang.
Don't use the NIV for this study. All right.
Okay.
NIV's NIV's fine Bible for reading, but don't use it for our study. It won't. It's not as literal, um, so it's not going to be as helpful as a tool for studying. Okay, you can read from it, or if you want, that's totally fine. But for these assignments, I want you to use a New American Standard or ESV or LSB. Okay. Um, and in this case,
So
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
so mostly there's 3
Yes.
lines.
Yeah, New King James is 3, New American Standard is 3. So we're going to go with
3
ESV has
lines.
4, but we're going to go with 3 because the other 2 have 3. And if I go to the Hebrew text, let me just see. Okay, we have one accent here, so we have one division here. We have another accent here, another division here. So it's 3 lines in the Hebrew text. All right. So 3 is, we'll go with that. All right. So that's the first challenge. Now the second challenge is now we have more than 2 lines. So we have to look at the the relationship between each of the lines. So this makes it a little bit more of a challenge. Okay. So what do you so we have 3 lines. What do you see here as far as the relationship between the lines?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's a little more complicated. Anyone want to help out? One thing that sticks out to me is as I look at lines 2 and 3, I notice, okay, I'll skip line 1 for now because that is a little more complicated. So I have you have established, have executed, equity, justice, and righteousness. What does that look like?
Synonyms.
Synonymous.
Yeah, I think 2 and lines 2 and 3 are synonymous. All right. Now we go, okay, what's the relationship with line 1?
Oh,
So yeah, this is a so how are our lines 2 and 3?
Ambut, Dr. Tim. Just kidding.
No,
We use
can't
that.
use on but this time. I think there's a relationship.
I think it's called
Yes.
illustrate.
Yeah, it's definitely developmental. It's not synonymous or contrastive. And I think illustration or explanation is the best option. Because the line 1's making a statement, right? Okay. Line 1's making a statement. Strength of the king loves justice. Now the translations have different this is a tough one to translate. ESV has the king in his might loves justice. The New King James has the king's strength loves justice. And then you read the NIV, the king is mighty, he loves justice. This is a little bit of a challenge there, but if we just go with the New American Standard, it's a statement. The strength of the king loves justice. And then I think, yeah, the next 2 lines are the illustration of that, showing how. What demonstrates, what shows that he loves justice? Well, he established equity, he executed justice and righteousness. So I would say, yeah, lines 2 and 3 illustrate line 1. That's how I would see it. Okay. That was a tough one, Jerome. I'm sorry to hand that to you, but that's the way I look at it. Any questions? Now, just to make this even more fun, let's look at the interlinear and see what if we got anything going on there with the word order. Okay. Here we go. Strength of the king, justice loves. You have established equity. Oh boy, look at this. Justice and righteousness in Jacob you have executed. What does that look like, fellas? What did he do in the second and third line here? Right? You have established equity. Okay, that follows the English translation. But then he has justice as the first word in the next line. Justice and righteousness in Jacob you have executed. He reversed the word order. All right, so if we take a look at, so literally it reads this way. The strength of the king loves justice. And then it's equity and righteousness in Jacob you have done. All right, so notice justice is at the end of line 1. Equity and righteousness, which are the synonymous terms, are the beginning of line 2. Sorry about that. You have established equity. Sorry about that, guys. I mixed this up. And then the next line is justice and righteousness in Jacob you have done. So it's these 2 lines that I'm interested in. Sorry, I got confused there. So notice you have done, you have established, In Jacob, just a little addition there, but that's okay. But notice equity, the subject, the object of the verb established, equity, and the object is it's at the end of the first line and it's at the beginning of the second line. So this is what we have. You have established equity, justice, and righteousness in Jacob. You have done. So what's he emphasizing here? So I really gave you a fun one, Jerome. And all kinds of neat stuff in this one. All right, we had to figure out the number of lines. We also had to notice the challenge with how the lines are connected, and then he throws in a chiasm in the second and third lines. All right. Questions on that? Okay. Well, let's go to the next verse. How much time we got? Oh, just got a few minutes left here. Jason, if you're there, can you take verse 5? Go ahead and read it, and then let's figure out how many lines, and then the type of parallelism.
Verse 5, exalt the Lord our God and worship at his footstool. Holy is he. In ESV, there are 3 lines, and also in NASB, 3 lines. So I will go for 3 lines.
Okay. New King James also is 3. So yeah, 3 lines. Now the relationship between them.
Line 1 and line 2 are synonymous. Exalt and worship.
Yeah, exalt. It's the verb worship. Those are similar. Exalt Yahweh. But then notice it says worship at his footstool. Now that's a little different. The command's the same, but the first one is telling who to worship. The second line says where. So I'm not sure if synonymous would fit. If it said and worship the Holy One or something like that, I think that would definitely be synonymous. But instead, he has the location, worship at his footstool, which could be a reference to the temple, perhaps the Holy of Holies. So I'm going to go with, I think the more likely one is developmental. And if it is, what kind of developmental do you think it would be? What's the second line doing? It's not saying the exact same thing. Is it expanding? Is it illustrating? Or is it giving a reason or result?
A result.
Okay, would worship at his footstool be a result of exalting him? Anyone have an idea?
Is it the additional assertive or expand?
Yeah, I think it's expansion. I think he's adding another idea here. First, he's saying worship Yahweh, and then he says where to worship, or exalt Yahweh, and then he says where to worship him. Okay. So yeah, I think developmental expansion makes sense. And then we've already talked about the relationship of line 3 up here in verse 3. Remember? Where we said this line, holy is he, was the reason. Okay, I think it's the same situation here. Where I think line 3 is the reason for lines 1 and 2. So I think it's developmental. You see that? Again, it's same idea. The word because or for is not written here, but I think that's the idea. It's the implied. Why should we exalt and worship? Because he is holy. Okay? And again, it's just going to follow the pattern what we see explicitly down in verse 9. Okay, let me give you guys one more just in the few minutes we have left here. Thanks, Jason. Yancey, you've been quiet. We're going to give you something to do here. Verse 6.
Verse 6, Moses and Aaron were among his priests, and Samuel was among those who called on his name. They called upon the Lord, and he answered them. So in ESV, there are 3 lines. In ESV, there are 3 lines. In KJV is 3 lines.
Okay, so that's easy. 3 lines.
Yeah.
Now for the more difficult challenge, what's the relationship?
So first line subject is Moses and Aaron. Second line, the subject is Samuel. And verb in first line is were among, and same, and then object is first line is.
Yeah, we could go, I would put among as part of the verbal idea. So his priests. Okay, so what do those two look like?
Yeah, here it's in synonymous.
I think so, yeah. Because all those are parallel. Moses and Aaron are different than Samuel, but it's still, men in the Bible, were among, was among, same, his priest, those who call on his name. I mean, that's what priests would do. So I think synonymous is exactly the right connection. How about line 3?
Line 3. I think this could be developmental.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's not synonymous or contrastive. So the question is, what
Yeah.
kind of developmental?
It cannot be expansion. It cannot be illustration. I think the purpose or reason.
Reason, or in this case, maybe a result, right? They called on his name, they called upon him, and he answered. Some might say expansion, but I think result makes the most sense because it includes this idea he answered them.
Mm-hmm.
So I would go with result myself. I don't know if someone else has a strong opinion otherwise, let can mention that. But I think that's good. Hey, let me quickly, I'll just go through the last couple of verses here for you guys, just for the sake of time, since it's already noon. But let me just do this real quick so we can cover the example. So we have verse 7, he spoke to them in the pillar of the cloud. They kept his testimonies and the statute he gave them. So the New American Standard has 3 lines here. We can just check real quick. The ESV has 3, and the New King James has 2. But ESV and NAS have 3, so that's what we're going to go with. And then the question is, what's the relationship Well, I think they kept, and notice we have a elision in verse 3 that's left out. His testimonies and the statute he gave them, I think it's synonymous. Lines 2 and 3, synonymous. And then the question is, okay, what's the connection then to line 1? I think lines 2 and 3 are the result of line 1. God spoke and they kept. That's my opinion. And since we don't have time to discuss too much, we're just going to go with my opinion. One thing to keep in mind, by the way, is people have asked about, we did talk about before punctuation marks. Notice here in this particular, if I go to the text here, there's a semicolon after the first line, but then there's second line, there's no semicolon. And then we have a period at the end of verse 7. So what's going on here? That's telling us, I think, 2 and 3 are closely connected. Again, remember, punctuation marks are translator decisions. There's no punctuation in the original text. These punctuation marks, semicolon here, comma here in verse 6, semicolon verse 7, the period. Now, the period does match. There is what's called a saluk in Hebrew text, which is a hard stop. So the period kind of almost is sort of matches the accent mark in the Hebrew text. But like semicolons, commas, exclamation points, those are interpretive decisions. And so a semicolon is a strong pause. It's stronger than a comma. So what the translators are saying is there's a strong pause between line 1 and lines 2 and 3. They don't have any pause between line 2 and 3. Okay. So some people like to, focus on the punctuation marks. They might help a little bit. Notice semicolon in first line in verse 8, but then in line 9, there's no punctuation mark between exalt and worship. And that kind of makes sense. Those two ideas are tied together closely. Same as in verse 5, exalt the Lord our God and worship. No punctuation between them. They are separate lines, but the translator is saying they see these two lines as pretty close together. And I would agree. They are closer than line 3, which notice a semicolon at the end of line 2. So it's not a period, it's not a full stop, but it is a strong pause. So they're using the punctuation to show that the third line is a little more distinct from the first two. Now, that's the opinion of the translator. So I don't use punctuation when I do parallelism just because it's the translator opinion, but I'm just showing you you might get some insight from what the translators are doing with the punctuation marks. Okay. All right, let's quickly finish this up so you guys can let you go. Okay, verse 8. O Lord our God, you answered them. You were forgiving God to them, and yet an avenger of their evil deeds. And if I go to the translations, New American Standard is 3 lines, ESV 3, New King James 3. So we're good with that, 3 lines. Now the question is, what is the relationship between them? And I would say line 2 and 3. This is a little bit tougher. Let me deal with 2 and 3 first. You are forgiving God and an avenger of their evil deeds. So I would say for lines 2 and 3, it's developmental expansion. All right, line 2 or line 3 is adding to line 2. Now, what's the relationship between line 1 with lines 2 and 3? That one's a little bit more of a challenge.
Illustrate.
Could be illustration in that it's showing how God answered them.
Yes.
Um,
Both in forgiveness and avenge.
yeah, that's what I went with initially. It could be expansion. You answered, you forgave, an avenger, but I think it's the way it's describing you were a forgiving God and an avenger. I think it's illustrating or explaining. The second two lines are explaining the first. Okay. Now, some might say, well, you subject, oops, and then answered, it's the verb, were, and then them. So some might say, well, this looks like it might be synonymous, but I'm not so convinced because it's describing God in the second line. The first line saying that God answered them. So it's an active transitive verb that has an object. But the second line is descriptive, right? You were a forgiving God. I think that's a little different. So I would see lines 2 and 3 developing line 1 and giving an explanation of line 1, showing how God answered. That's my opinion. Now remember, at this stage, it's like the block diagram. There may be a couple of viable, or possible options. So we can't be 100% certain at this point. But what it's doing is it forces us to think about the possibilities. All right. Okay. Quickly, last
Pastor
one.
Tim, quick
Yeah,
question.
Nigel.
Lines 2 and 3, not contrastive, contrasting.
Well, they do include yet in there. So where are we at? Lines 2 and 3. Yeah, I have to think about an avenger versus forgiving. There. Yeah, I have to think about that. I see some elements that could show that.
Yeah, it's it's going in opposite directions, but since it is both can be considered as both facets, so I think it is still expanding in either directions. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, I see that contrast. Obviously, forgive and avenge are contrasting ideas. Yet, um, yeah, because of how it's the connection it seems to verse 1 to line 1, I'd still probably lean developmental expansion, but contrastive is a good consideration.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Good question. Good observation. Okay, let me do verse 9 real quick and then let you guys go. This one's pretty straightforward because it's going to match what we've seen earlier already. Exalt the Lord our God, worship at his holy hill, for holy is the Lord our God. All three translations have 3 lines. And then we've already recognized the relationship of the third line with that word for. All right, that line 3 gives the reason for lines 1 and 2, right? And then lines 1 and 2, exalt, worship Yahweh, the Lord, but here it's at his holy hill. So remember before that we already did this with verse 5. This is almost exact same as verse 5. Second line, lines 1 and 2, is developmental expansion, right? The first line says who to worship. The second line says where. And then the third line is the reason. And in this case, we have the word for, as I mentioned. So he explicitly says this is a reason. Why should we exalt and worship? Because or for holy is the Lord our God. Okay, so that's developmental reason. Okay? So, all that said, for your assignment, this assignment 3.9, I used our Psalm 128 example from class, which will be in the syllabus. So, as the example, and then I just gave you space to do. And then here I did do it in two separate steps. Do the lines first, and again, you need to consult the other translations, then identify the type of parallelism. And then I ask you to put all the parallelisms together, just repeat that. So I think I did that here. Yeah. So what I like to do is once I've done the parallelism, then I just put it all together and I see if there's a pattern. And in the case of this one, obviously the dominant form is developmental, as you can see. That's the most common. We do have some synonymous, a few examples of synonymous here. Okay. I think there's 5, but there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 examples of developmental. So that's the more dominant pattern. There. Okay. Focus on developmental indicates the instructive nature of the psalm, making declarations about God and then declaring how we should respond. So that's all I had to comment on that. So what I like you guys to do when you're doing your assignment is just at the end, after you've done the parallelism, just go back and then compare. Here's what I did for Psalm 128. I just restate the parallelism for each one and then give a comment if you see a pattern or not. Okay? All right. Well, hopefully that was helpful to you guys. And as far as next week, I'm actually going to be in the Philippines. I'm leaving on Wednesday. I'm going to be in the Philippines in Davao. First, I'll be in Manila for a couple days. Then my wife and I are going to Myanmar. I'm going to do some training there, and then we'll be back in Davao the last week of January. So if you guys want to, take a trip and come see me, you can come down to Davao and work on your tan down there. I'll be at Soli Deo Gloria, doing some conference there and fellowshipping with the saints there. So because of that, we won't be having in-person meetings until February when I get back, first week of February. So we'll be out the next couple weeks. I will try my best to record the next assignment session for you guys, the imagery, poetic devices. I'll try my hardest to get that done for you next week if possible. If not, we'll just cover it when I get back in a couple weeks, okay? Oh, okay, it's raining thumbs in Steven's room. That's a cool feature. How do you do that? How do you make it rain thumbs?
I also don't know. Oh, send with effect.
Send
See,
with it.
the react.
Oh, I see React. I don't have a send with effect. I just have
See,
recognize.
see.
Oh, I see. Send with effect. Ah, very nice.
Those are free stuff, Dr. Tibbs. Free
Free
stuff.
stuff. Thank you. How about this one? I love you guys. Oh, I forgot. This is being recorded. I probably shouldn't do that.
Yes.
Yeah, don't goof
Okay.
around. This is serious. It's a serious class.
Okay.
Okay. Stephen, you want to close us in prayer?